Thanks, Sue, and thanks for the invitation to come along and speak this morning. I was very happy to take up the role of a commissioner in this project going forward. I think it's a really important piece of work. I just recently joined Community after getting early release from the Scottish Parliament in December this year. It's interesting to hear John Curtis talk about prison reform, and I managed to get out of the Scottish Parliament a lot earlier than most people do. But this has been an issue in terms of employment around the workplace, fair employment practice around the workplace, and also working with Unions21 on a number of key issues over a period of time that I've taken a real interest in. Where we are, I think right now, is obviously in terms of public spending, in terms of the opportunities that might be afforded through public spending, are at a minimum. We've come up to the budget, we're obviously seeing a bit of a debate and discussion around exactly about what might happen in terms of trying to improve capital projects, get more infrastructure projects on the ground. But one of the key issues that I see, and one of the flaws in that argument, is that we don't have a government who believes in intervention of any kind. So regardless of what happens, if there is a shift towards more capital spending over the next few years and the amount of time that takes to come on stream, we then have a real issue in terms of convincing this government that we should be using procurement more creatively to try and make sure that there's more community benefit clauses in these big projects, that there's more apprentices in these big projects, that there's opportunities for staff to train people who have been longer term unemployed, for example. So there is a massive challenge there for us as a movement. I think more generally what we need to think about, and John Curtis mentioned this morning, is how we start to influence this policy agenda looking towards the future, so that we have a very clear position as a wider movement on exactly what fair employment means, how it will contribute directly to improving productivity and high-performing workplaces, and what that means for procurement and also other levels of government spending, which we'll come on to in a moment. Now, in terms of procurement, I'm going to give an example of where it can go wrong. Certainly in my own area, not too far away from where I live, there is the construction of the biggest infrastructure project that Scotland has seen in a generation, the new Forth crossing. Now, much was made of that in terms of the process going through Parliament and what that would actually mean in terms of jobs. It wasn't just going to be a legacy in terms of infrastructure, it was going to make sure that thousands of young people were getting opportunities and people who had been longer term unemployed were retrained to work on it. But what happened was, during that procurement process, is that the weighting of the process was 97% towards cost. If there had been a larger weighting towards community benefit, we would have then saw a company like Tata Steel, who just happened to be along the road in Motherwell, being able to then provide some of the raw materials and be part of the procurement process, and therefore provide the employment opportunities that would flow from that. And I think this is the conservative of a small c approach that we have within the civil service here in terms of procurement, not just in Scotland in that experience, but right across the UK. I'm sure we all heard examples how our European counterparts are just a little bit smarter with these things, place more emphasis on community benefit and opportunities for people within the areas that they want to support, and put a focus on that, and therefore ensure that when the government spending is at the levels that we saw in, for example, the new Forth road crossing, that it does actually reach into our communities as far as we would like to see. So that is the huge challenge in terms of intervention from this government around procurement. But there's also other levels of government spending we need to think about. Another example, 5 miles up the road from where I live, I'm starting to get paranoid here that all these things are happening in and around the area that I live. Because the third example I'm going to give you is only 10 miles up the road. But what I would say is we had a level of investment from Amazon, who came in, who were given £5 million by the Scottish Government as leverage towards a bigger investment for a distribution logistics centre in Scotland. So essentially, they have made a commitment to employ 800 people. And we all know, I'm sure we've all heard horror stories about some of the employment practices in and around Amazon. But you would have thought one of the most simple asks throughout that process would have been to say, if you're going to employ these people, we expect the vast majority of them to be employed directly on a permanent basis. What we have seen here is £5 million worth of UK taxpayers' money going into this company and essentially funding employment practice, which is hugely questionable, and the vast majority of employees, apart from a very small core of managers, are employed through 3 agencies, primarily on 0-hour contracts. And for me, that is just a huge opportunity missed in terms of being able to use, public money in a very tight period to ensure that we promote better employment practice. But it's not just about investment, it's about investment in infrastructure. Now, there's another company, and I'm sure you're all aware that renewable energy in Scotland is doing pretty well. There is a huge potential there. The shift potentially to more manufacturing opportunities is there as well, and particularly looking at offshore wind. And a lot of the former areas which were involved in offshore oil and gas fabrication in the past are turning their heads to these new opportunities. But I'm sure you will be aware of some of the questionable employment practices that dogged that industry for a number of years. And certainly the people who are involved in this, again, a company very close to where I live called Bifab, who have benefited from, again, 15 to 20 million pounds worth of infrastructure investment to develop an energy park, have hugely questionable employment practices. You can't get through the door unless you're set yourself up as a limited company. And we'll hear many former colleagues that I worked alongside in Scotland, particularly from UCAT, talking about the bogus self-employed. And here we have a new industry being funded and getting support from the Scottish Government, who are not putting barriers in place to ensure, or even contractual obligations to ensure that the employment practices are something that we can be proud of. So these are challenges, I think, that we face in that sense. I really do believe that the next couple of years, in terms of whatever happens in the next election, are going to be challenging to ensure that we get the right policy narrative around this, and we can make sure that every pound we spend actually reaches as far as it can into the communities and the people that we represent. The final thing I want to say, and I've heard a lot about the constitutional debate this morning around what might happen about a referendum in Europe and UK's place in Europe. Of course, there is another constitutional debate taking place not so far away just now, just up the road where I'm going home tonight. And the one worrying thing about that, and certainly in some of the discussions and dialogue that I've had with colleagues down here, is that people think that whatever happens in that constitutional debate, that there will be no impact for the remainder of the UK. Now, I'm a bit worried about that, and I think there needs to be a bit more of a debate. Some people believe that Scotland could be some sort of socialist utopia or a beacon for progressives if it was independent. I would say to you, the SNP government are very keen to talk about low levels of taxation, about eradicating red tape, bonfires at Quangos, all that sort of stuff. They have never made one representation or said one thing about what employment legislation would look like in independent Scotland. They made no representation of the Beecroft Review, which is very unusual given that they have a policy of agitation with the UK government on a regular basis, and they have no interest in that area. Now that could be a question that the Scottish public have to deal with, but there is an implication, a direct implication for independent Scotland for UK employment rights across the rest of the country. And that is, if you combine this with the repatriation that David Cameron has been discussing around bringing employment rights back from Europe so they can be decided at UK level, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you could potentially take 40-odd Labour MPs out of Westminster, Scottish Labour MPs, who would be very sympathetic in ensuring that employment rights are held up. Even in a scenario where you could find Devo Max, which is a position where employment rights would probably shift to Scotland, and you'd see a huge reduction in Scottish representation here at Westminster. we could find ourselves in a situation where employment rights are undermined at UK level and not a priority in Scotland in post-independence. Now, this is my first opportunity to say this to a UK-wide audience, if you like, people who are here from all over the country, and I think it's important for people to recognise that, because the debate has been just now really about, well, you know, Scotland could go off and do its own way, and perhaps there might be examples of how to do things better that we could copy here at UK level. But there are direct implications for that route. The final thing, and the final thing I wanted to say was that what we're talking about today is trade unions trying to influence policy at governmental level to ensure that we develop fair employment practices. And that's fine. But what doesn't flow from that necessarily is trade union membership. And if we're going to do that, and we're going to get it right at that level, we have to then make sure that there is some wider benefit for the trade union movement. We need to have an organising strategy, a recruitment strategy, whatever that is, to try and make sure that we benefit from these employment opportunities when public spending starts to improve. And if we don't do that, I think we could find ourselves in a situation of managing steady decline in the private sector, which I think will be really, really difficult to reverse. We've got an opportunity now. I think we've got a strong story to tell. I think we've got quite a good reputation, particularly in the private sector, for making some difficult decisions and showing leadership to ensure that employment is a priority in the areas that we represent. And I've been really pleased to be involved in this project, and I'd be happy to take the questions once again. Thank you.